Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to look at the Passion accounts in the four Gospels and to some extent Acts. Every Easter, millions around the world celebrate the purported resurrection of Jesus. So I'll be looking at the last days of Jesus as told by the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts and John, and examining the inconsistencies that raise questions about their historical reliability. The first item I'll be looking at is, when did Jesus die? In Mark 15:25 it says, "It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him." But in John chapter 19 verses 14 through 16 it says, "Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, 'Here is your king.' They cried out, 'Away with him, crucify him.' Pilate asked them, 'Shall I crucify your king?' The chief priests answered, 'We have no king but Caesar.' Then he handed him over to them to be crucified." So which one is it? Was Jesus already hanging on the cross by 9 in the morning, or was he just being sentenced at noon? That's a major timeline issue. The second item is, who carried the cross? Matthew, Mark and Luke all say Simon of Cyrene carried the cross. Also note, when I read the stories, the accounts of that, the direct copying that Matthew does from Mark. In Matthew 27:31 through 34, it says, "After mocking him," i.e. Jesus, "they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink, mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it." In Mark 15, verses 20 through 23, it says, "After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. They compelled a passerby who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it." And similarly, in Luke chapter 23, verses 24 through 26, it says, "So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. As they led him away, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and they laid the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus." But then in John chapter 19, verses 15 through 18, it reads as follows, "They cried out, 'Away with him, crucify him.' Pilate asked them, 'Shall I crucify your king?' The chief priests answered, 'We have no king but Caesar.' Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him with 2 others, one on either side, with Jesus between them." So who carried the cross up to Golgotha? Jesus by himself, or Simon of Cyrene? The third item we're looking at is, what were Jesus' last words? Apologists will say all of these were Jesus' last words in some sequence or other, but see if that makes any sense given the context in each gospel. In Matthew and Mark, the final words are, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Again, notice the direct copying Matthew does of Mark's account. In Matthew it states, in chapter 27, verses 45 through 50, From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, This man's calling for Elijah. At once one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the other said, Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come to save him. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice, and breathed his last. And then Mark's account states in chapter 15, verses 33 through 37, When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, Listen, he's calling for Elijah. And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. In Luke, we get different last words. It's, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Here's the account in Luke chapter 23, verses 44 through 46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's light failed and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. In John, his final words are, It is finished. In John, chapter 19, verses 28 through 30, it reads as follows. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, I'm thirsty. A jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, It's finished. Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. You don't get 3 different last words until something's off in the sources. Number 4. What did Judas do with the money he received for his betrayal? In Matthew, chapter 27, verses 3 through 8, it reads, When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, I've sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, What's that to us? See to it yourself. Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, It's not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they're blood money. After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. But then see the following account in Acts chapter 1, verses 15 through 19. In those days Peter stood up among the believers, a group numbering about 120, and said, Brothers and sisters, the scripture had to be fulfilled in which the Holy Spirit spoke long ago through David concerning Judas, who served as guide for those who arrested Jesus. He was one of our number and shared in our ministry. With the payment he received for his wickedness, Judas bought a field. There he fell headlong, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. Everyone in Jerusalem heard about this, so they called that field in their language Akeldama, that is, field of blood. So, in Matthew's account, Judas returns the money, then takes his own life by hanging himself in some unknown location, and then the priests use the money to buy a field where foreigners are buried, and that explains the name of the field, i.e. field of blood, because it was bought using blood money. But in the Acts account, Judas buys the field, he falls and spills out his guts, and that explains why the field is called Field of Blood, because that is where Judas' blood was spilt. The stories clearly contradict each other. The next item number 5, is what happened at the tomb, and this includes several events. How many women went to the tomb? Each gospel offers a different list of women. Here's how it breaks down. In Matthew there are 2 women. Matthew 28:1 says, "After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb." In Mark it's 3 women. In Mark 16:1 it reads, "When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him." In Luke it's a group of women, including Joanna. In Luke 24:10 it reads, "Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles." And in John, it's only Mary Magdalene. John 20, verse 1 reads, "Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb." This does raise questions. Was it 1 woman, 2, 3, or a whole group? And who is waiting at the tomb? In each gospel, someone is waiting at the tomb, but the number, description, and location of these figures differ substantially. In Matthew, it is 1 angel outside the tomb. Matthew 28:2 reads, "Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it." And in Mark, it's 1 young man inside the tomb. Mark 16, verses 4 and 5 reads, "But when they," i.e. the women, "looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed." In Luke, it's 2 men inside the tomb. Luke 24, 1-4 reads, "But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they," that is the women, "came to the tomb, taking the spices that they'd prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they didn't find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them." And in John, it's 2 angels inside the tomb with Mary. In John chapter 20, verse 12, it reads, "And she saw 2 angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet." Again, the accounts differ. Was it 1 or 2 figures? Were they men or angels? Were they inside or outside the tomb? Another event at the tomb is when the stone was rolled away. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 1-6, it reads, "After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, 'Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised as he said. Come, see the place where he lay.'" And contrast that with the other accounts. In Mark chapter 16, verses 2-5, it says, "And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, 'Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?' When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed." And also Luke chapter 24, verses 1-3, But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. And similarly in John chapter 20, verses 1 through 10, you'll see the stone is already rolled away. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went towards the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed, for as yet they didn't understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. So, did the women witness the stone being rolled away by an angel, and being addressed by that same angel, or did they arrive and find it moved away already? The Gospels don't agree. How long was Jesus in the tomb for? In Matthew 12, verse 40, it has Jesus say, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so for 3 days and 3 nights will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth." Friday evening to Sunday morning gives us 2 nights and parts of 3 days. So where's this third night? Jesus' own prediction doesn't match the timeline. Item number 7. What were Jesus' instructions to the disciples, and where did Jesus first appear to the disciples? In Galilee or in Jerusalem? In Matthew, Jesus tells the disciples to go to Galilee to see a first appearance to them there. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 5 through 10, it reads as follows, "But the angel said to the women, 'Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who is crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you.' So they left the tomb quickly, with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them," that is the women, "and said, 'Greetings!' And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, 'Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers and sisters to go to Galilee. There they will see me.'" And then, indeed, in Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 and 17, that appearance is described. "Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted." So note that the first appearance to the disciples here is in Galilee, and also note the weird thing that he's said to be appearing to them there, but some doubted, making it sound more like a modern-day Marian apparition, where some people who were there swear they saw something, and then others say they saw nothing special. Now in Luke, contrary to Matthew's story, Jesus appears to all of the 11 disciples in Jerusalem, after appearing to the 2 in Emmaus just outside Jerusalem, and tells them, all of the disciples, to stay in Jerusalem. So it reads this is Luke chapter 24, verses 31 through 49. "Then their eyes were opened, and they, i.e. the 2 disciples at Emmaus just outside Jerusalem, recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, 'Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road while he was opening the scriptures to us. That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost doesn't have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here in the city until you've been clothed with power from on high." So the key inconsistencies here are, in Matthew, the first appearance to the disciples is in Galilee on a mountain, and the disciples were told to go there beforehand through the women. Whereas in Luke, the first appearance is to 2 disciples 7 miles outside Jerusalem in Emmaus, and then to all of the disciples in Jerusalem, and the disciples are told to stay in Jerusalem. Now, who first saw Jesus? In Matthew chapter 28 verse 9, women see Jesus as they leave the tomb. So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings!" And they came to him, took hold of his feet and worshipped him. But in Mark 16 verse 8, no one sees Jesus. The earliest manuscripts end at 16:8, which reads, "So they went out," that is the women, "and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." So there's a hint at a resurrection, but there is no appearance in the earliest versions of Mark. In Luke chapter 23 verses 55 and 56 and chapter 24 verses 13 through 34, there is an appearance to first 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus and then to the others. Now this is a long passage, so bear with me, because it does show how it's a very different account. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath they rested, according to the commandment. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they'd prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they didn't find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you, while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they didn't believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. Now on that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we'd hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they didn't find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "Lord has risen indeed, and he's appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. But then in John chapter 20, verses 11 through 18, the first appearance is to Mary Magdalene by herself at the tomb, and only then to others. Remember that in the previous passage we just read, where it says, I mean in Luke, it says, "They came back, the women came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he, i.e. Jesus, was alive." Right? The angels tell them. There is no account of Jesus appearing to the women. There's an account of angels telling the women that he was alive. But then in John, it reads, "But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw 2 angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping?' She said to them, 'They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him.' When she'd said this, she turned round and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping? For whom are you looking?' Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, 'Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I'll take him away.' Jesus said to her, 'Mary.' She turned and said to him in Hebrew, 'Rabboni,' which means teacher. Jesus said to her, 'Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God.' Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, 'I've seen the Lord.' And she told them that he had said these things to her. These aren't just different details. They're different narratives altogether, with Mary only being told at the tomb Jesus is risen in the Luke account, and Jesus for the first time appearing to two disciples in Emmaus, versus in John's account, Mary talking to Jesus at the tomb. Item number 9. The ending of Mark's Gospel. We've mentioned this before, but the earliest manuscripts end at Mark 16:8. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. But then in later manuscripts, verses 9 through 20 are added, including appearances and instructions to the disciples. The earliest versions didn't include even a resurrection appearance. This later long ending, or even a short ending, they were added later, likely to harmonize with the other gospel stories. Now, another odd feature in Matthew is that he places guards at the tomb. This is only present there. Matthew, chapter 27, verses 62 through 66, and then another mention of the guards in Matthew, chapter 28, verses 11 through 15. It reads as follows: The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember what that impostor said while he was still alive. After 3 days I'll rise again. Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may go and steal him away and tell the people he's been raised from the dead, and the last deception would be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can." So they went with the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone. And then after the resurrection has happened and the guards have witnessed that, Matthew 28 verses 11 through 15 read, "While they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened. After the priests had assembled with the elders, they devised a plan to give a large sum of money to the soldiers, telling them, 'You must say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this comes to the governor's ears, we'll satisfy him and keep you out of trouble.' So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story is still told among the Jews to this day." Now, this story is completely absent in Mark, Luke, and John. Why does only Matthew mention guards? Perhaps because people were already accusing Christians of making up the story, so Matthew tries to rebut that preemptively by having guards secure the tomb with a stone and standing guard outside, and then being told to lie about what happened so believers could go into the conspiracy mode they're so fond of even today, like the deep state did it. Now, the next item is the earthquake and the walking dead, again only mentioned in Matthew. Matthew chapter 27 verses 51 through 53 say, "At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many." So the story in Matthew here describes an earthquake, people raising from their graves. So we have a mini zombie apocalypse that somehow no other gospel writers mention. You'd think mass resurrection in the capital would make the cut. When people say that the Gospels offer 4 perspectives on the same truth, that sounds noble, but it completely falls apart under scrutiny. And when the most important event in Christianity, the resurrection, is described this inconsistently and contradictorily, we have every reason to doubt its historical reliability. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment, give us a like, and I'll look forward to your comments about my horrible accent. See ya.